let's, and this is some speculation, obviously, and everybody's speculating on this, but you've spent a great deal of time covering this topic, and I'd like to get your assessment on how you imagine this retaliation will break out. Look, the Supreme Command, the leader of Khamenei has promised retaliation, so they have no choice, right? They have to do this. But how do you imagine it to look at the end of the day?
So I think that they're going to employ the full range of options. One, they've been studying our ability to respond and Israel's ability to respond. They learned a lot in the last several months, especially during the April assault, where we had 320 combination of missile and drones launched against it. And again, as we talked about, they've got an asymmetric capability to threaten diplomatic facilities or economic infrastructure and target individuals, not just in the Middle East, but in Europe, in Asia, to a certain extent inside the Americas. And so they have capabilities, and I suspect they're going to employ them in combination. And that's what the Axis was designed to do, to impose costs to deter or to respond to a strike against Iran. And that was the original purpose. Now it's being used since October the 7th in an offensive way. So the direct answer to your question is, I think it's going to be sequential. It is going to start in one vector, but it will eventually include the other. So you'll see perhaps an initiation from Hezbollah in Lebanon. It could equally come from the Houthis in Yemen. Obviously, the Israelis responded to the last strike on Tel Aviv by destroying oil facilities in Hodeidah. It could come from Iraq and Syria. I don't think it would come necessarily from Iran first, but that's also an option. More importantly, I think you can see that all of the inbound vectors, the different directions of attack, complicate effective air defense. And second, that it'll come from a variety of altitudes. So it's a different proposition to defend against high-altitude ballistic missiles, from land attack cruise missiles to drones. All three are different problems and different vectors. So they're going to attempt to overwhelm the Israeli air defense system and our own by providing multiple threats from multiple vectors at multiple altitudes, and at the same time incorporate asymmetric threats from cyber to terrorism outside the area of operation. I think we can expect to see a combination, and I think we can expect to see it sequenced over a series of days, perhaps even a week, depending on the constellation and how well it goes up at first.
Yeah, that's a chaotic scenario. But if we look at the issue of self-preservation, and what I mean by that is, look, the mullahs aren't stupid, right? And they're also human, and they like power, right? So I would argue that they're not going to do anything that jeopardizes their long-term position here. And the IRGC, which makes a great deal of money, they've got their hands in every part of that Iranian economy. They also understand that they've got a good thing going, right? So I guess where I'm going with this, Robert, is if you imagine that a wider conflict, something that would break out into direct conflict between Israel, which I assume would have to include then the U.S., and Iran, would likely, from a pragmatic sense, would likely mean the end of the Iranian regime as it currently exists. Because and correct me if I'm wrong, but in a broader regional conflict that brings these elements together in conflict, do you assess that somehow the Iranian regime could get the upper hand on that, even with their proxies? You see where I'm going with this?
I do, and you're not alone. But what I've learned over time is that while they are rational and they have a deliberate process for making decisions, they're certainly not stupid. They frequently miscalculate. They make a lot of mistakes. And right now, I judge that the supreme leader does not envision circumstances that would threaten his grip on power. There are greater and lesser risks depending on the options employed, but that's why the axis exists. So far, no one except Israel has determined that they will impose costs directly on Iran for the actions of their surrogates. And as long as that's the case, Iran judges that Israel alone cannot threaten the survival and that the United States is dedicated to constraining Israel under the current administration's policies, and as they've publicly stated. So you're right, but the reality that the supreme leader is currently living in doesn't, I think, allow for him to envision a real risk to regime survival. He doesn't, in other words, judge that the United States would join the fray and impose costs on Tehran. Under most scenarios, he envisions, and again, look at what happened in April. So they launched 320 missiles. 16 were launched after the Qasem Soleimani strike for order of magnitude difference, and only 12 made it to their target. All of them were manageable, older systems. We knew about it in advance. They told us in advance. 320 projectiles were launched at any one given time. If you and I had to recreate that, I don't know that we could prevent somebody from dying. It's a miracle. I know we're competent. The Israelis are competent. It's still a miracle when you launch that many warheads at any given direction that somebody doesn't get killed. I think that they envisioned that they got away with it and they'd be able to do it again. And we led them to believe it. So I think that they're likely to miscalculate here.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, a really positive, nice, and kind comment. That would be appreciated. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily updates.